Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode 34, and today we're going to dive into the Streets of New Capenna data for the first time. I got a fresh pile of 17Lands data, both on draft and on gameplay. So I'm going to try to look at it a bit, at least. So we're going to look at the archetype win rates, and I'm pretty sure that the worst kept secret of Limited right now is that the band colors are just overperforming. But we're going to look at it in a bit of more detail. Because it's a free color set that we didn't have for a long time and never since I started doing those seminars, I'm going to talk a bit about mana strategies and how do they impact the win rate. Basically looking at the number of pips and color and sources of given color in decks and how does it impact the win rate. I'm going to give you the data on the openness of the colors and color triplets and pairs, so that you know which are the reasons why some decks are winning. Is it because the color is outrageously open, or is it because the cards are super strong and the color is challenged itself, but the power itself is defending it? And then we're going to have the summary of the color combinations, focusing on commons and uncommons. So I'm going to talk about the best common on each combination, the best 2-drop, because I thought 2-drops are interesting in this format, and the card that I selected by hand that I thought might be interesting for you. Okay, so I always start with a preamble, and today's preamble is topical. My statement that I'm going to try to hammer home here is that we lose many more games because of bad mana bases than because of low card quality in the deck. If you consume any kind of content, you will more or less know what cards are good. If you play a lot, you'll figure it out on your own. You maybe even have your own evaluations, but that still doesn't make your deck immune to mana screw, color screw especially. And in 3-color set like this one, it's going to be much more prevalent. So I don't even remember how many drafts do I have when I drafted a decent deck, and then I analyzed it afterwards and I said, okay, I went 5-3, but well, basically I went 5-3, but I lost one game to a better deck. That happens, you can't draft the Basto deck every single time. And then 2 games I just had like a color screw and I didn't come out of the blocks, and that was it. And then I caught myself like, did I have to lose to that color screw? Couldn't I have sacrificed one pick of a menial common and put card that would fix my colors much better? And I think that in this set, it's going to be very punishing if you're not thinking about your mana base much earlier. I'm not going to dive into that data today. I'm going to leave it probably for the next seminar, because next seminar I'm going to try to talk a bit more about signals in draft itself, and today I'm going to talk more about cards in deck already and win rates of those. But I had a brief look at the data from drafts, and as it was in the case in the previous sets, the triumphs, well, the pseudo triumphs, the like Broker's Hideout and the 2-color lands are much harder to get in pack 2 and pack 3 than in pack 1, which means that people prioritize the cards for their spells for their deck first, and then they want to leave the fixing for as late as possible. And I'm not sure this is the best strategy. I will definitely try to draft those hideouts, those 2-color lands, as early as I can in the first pack, because if I have a good mana base, then I can focus on getting my cards, and I should get their own playables. And even if by picking a triple land, I'm going to lose out on even like a solid playable, like a C+ card, I'm pretty sure that C+ card is going to be replaced by possibly a slightly lower value C card, maybe also a C+, but maybe less fitting for the deck, which is not a tragedy. I shouldn't lose because I have a slightly worse 2-drop in my deck, but I will lose if I don't draw one of my important colors and I'm not able to cast my good spells. So in this preamble, I just want you to really start overvaluing mana fixing, because as I will show you later in the data, especially in 3-color decks, solid mana is the key for success. And I think that the data that I'm looked at strongly suggest that the lower win rate of the 3-color decks is mainly because of the bad mana. Okay, so just to give you a brief data summary, of course, as always, all the data comes from 17Lands.com. I strongly encourage you to A, use it, B, support it on Patreon, C, really use it. I mean, not just record your games, but also go back to the records and try to figure out what went wrong, what went right. This particular data set has around 145,000 games across 23 or so thousand drafts. So that's a pretty sizable data set for those first couple of days. That's turns out that other people had more time to play than I did, and they managed to populate the data set quite proficiently. It's roughly the same as Kamigawa at the same stage, but keep in mind that Kamigawa actually started without a glitch, while this one lost the first 8 hours of play when people were super stoked to draft and populate the data. So actually, probably, if you would discount the fact that there was a glitch at the start of the format, probably this format proved to be slightly more popular than Kamigawa, which is a good signal for Arena being healthy, at least in terms of 17Lands users using it. Okay, so let's start with the archetype power ranking. And I'm pretty sure that most of you do know already by now that band colors are really good. And I took all the 5 allied color pairs, so the ones that are next to each other on the back of the card, and I took all the 3 color pairs that are supported in the format. So if you look from the most winningest archetype to the least winningest, we have the Azorius blue-white that has around 59.7% win rate. I recalculated the data myself, so it might disagree a bit with the website. But this encompasses both blue-white decks and blue-white decks with slight of splash, most likely slight splash of green or slight splash of black, because that's how the format is constructed to be supported. So blue-white decks and blue-white with a bit of splash have 59.7% win rate. Then we have the band, so the brokers in the new language, that has around 59% win rate, and Selesnya with or without splash 58.9. So all 3 of those combinations are having a pretty high win rate of around 59% in total. And then there is a massive drop, and really a massive drop, 3 percentage points, 3.7 percentage point to be precise, towards the 4th color combination, and that is and sorry, something went. Okay, yeah, and that is Rakdos with 55.2. So we are dropping from 58.9 in Selesnya, and Rakdos has 55.2. That's a big drop. This means that blue-white-green decks in general are just head and shoulder above anything else. And then we have Dimir, so blue-black at 55%, and Obscura / Esper, so white, blue, black at 54.3. And all these are sort of clustering together. Then we also have Grexis at 54.3 and Cabaretti at 53.9. So all those 5 combinations, Cabaretti, of course, is also known as Naya, also known as white, red, green. And Grix is known as Maestros as blue, black, red. But all of those basically fall between 55 and 54%. So it's quite flat level there. And then we have another drop-off of around 2 to 3 percentage points. And we have Gruul, so red-green at 51.8, and black-red-green, aka Jaunt, at 51.2. And these are markedly lower in terms of their win rate than the remaining 8 archetypes that are supported. So basically, 3 tiers of color combinations, band and 2 color pairs within band, head and shoulder above everything. Gruel and Jund, well, I don't know what is the opposite of Head and Shoulders, but definitely below everything at 50, 52, 51%. And everything else is in the middle with 54, 55. So these graphs are a bit complicated, but we'll try to walk through them. But basically, what I thought then is that, okay, if there are 3 color combinations, they can be very different from each other. There can be heavy decks that are heavy on 2 colors and have like a big splash of the third one, or there can be decks that are more or less evenly distributed among all the colors, and there is nothing that really has more. So it's sort of like symmetrically built. And I wanted to look at, is there a difference in the win rates depending on the intensity of a given color? And to do that, I basically looked at how many pips of each color are there in a particular archetype, and calculated win rates of decks that have this particular intensity of one single color. And hopefully by looking at all 3 graphs at the same time, like looking at how powerful are the intensities of all 3 colors, we could figure out which type of builds of 3 color combinations are going to be the most successful ones. And I started with brokers, so banned. And looking at it, first thing you see is that there is probably a group of broker decks that are very light on white, that are basically a blue-green deck with a couple of white cards splashed in for power. And somehow they seem to work because they have decks that are very low on white that are in brokers have roughly 66% win rate, which is really high even for that archetype. But then we have something weird and decks that that have slightly more of it all of a sudden don't perform very well. So again, come with a bit of caution to that kind of result, but there might be something there. And apart from that, what we can see from those graphs is that basically the more white, the better. So we started around 55, 56, 57%. And the more white pips appear in the deck, the closer it gets to 60, 61% win rate. So it seems that you either have very little white or you try to get as much white as possible in this deck. Now, when you look at blue in those decks, it seems relatively evenly distributed. So it doesn't matter if you have just a small amount of like a larger splash of blue, or if you have quite heavily blue deck in brokers colors. They have a pretty solid win rate across the board. Maybe there is a bit of something to say that very heavily blue decks also tend to perform well, because it also might explain, might mean that blue was very open on that pod, and if blue is very open and it has powerful cards in it, you're going to get quite a lot of power there. Another point that, and if you look at green, you see that, again, it performs quite well in that archetype across board. Even if you have like very little green, it performs relatively well at 58, 59% win rates. And then there is a group of super heavy on green decks that have 66% win rate. That sort of starts growing from 13 green pips upwards to 19. With a bit of variance here probably. But it seems that if green is open, the color is really strong and it matches very well with brokers. So I think that this is the signal of those very open green pods, and you can get very powerful decks out of it. So when you think about green as a color, it may be slightly underperforming and not one of the top 2 probably powerful colors in the format, but it's partly because it's overdrafted, and if it's open, then it becomes quite powerful. So I think that this kind of data tends to push me to the conclusion that green is pretty strong, and if format will correct and people will stop drafting it stop drafting it so much because they will, for instance, stop drafting red-green, green might get very powerful, and we can evaluate some green cards a bit up compared to what we have them right now. Even though, of course, green is not bad, it's in 2 of the 3 best archetypes in the format. Then when we look at Obscura, this is an archetype with a much lower win rate than the previous one. So when you see that here we have like numbers in the 58, 59% range, here we start seeing like 53, 52% win rates in some categories. In some categories, there's nothing because there was just not enough data. I only took points that had 100 plus games played, which is still not a lot. My cat is misbehaving. But what you can see again is that Obscura obviously being white, blue, black. White, it's probably the case of the more the better. And I think that is quite logical with white being the strongest color in general in the format. So I would say, if you can get on white, basically. Blue, again, you can see the sort of like bump in the early stages when you see that there is like few blue cards in the deck, but probably few but very powerful ones. You have like a decent win rates, but apart from that, it's quite middling, and there is not like a super strong trend. There might be some like increase towards the heavy on the blue part of the white, blue, black. And black is middling across the board. It's generally probably the best when you have quite little of it. So you put some maybe powerful 3-color synergistic cards, and the more you put, the less benefit you get from there. So like decks with like 4 to 8 black pips have around 55-56% win rate, and decks with that have like 10 up to 15, they will be more in the 52-53% range in terms of winning. So and I guess that there's this always outlier at the end with the 19 pips black decks, but that probably would mean black was atrociously open and you get like all the cream from black in your deck. So that might be an artifact of openness of the table and not of the power of the color itself, because if you can get so many black pips in your deck, it means it was really open. But yeah, it looks like black is going to be more of a support color for Obscura if you want to make the best version of the deck, and not a dominant color. Right, now he'll go with Cabaretti. Cabaretti. Well, choose your pronunciation yourself. I will go with Cabaretti. Here we again see the same trend as in all the other 3 combinations we looked at before. There is an increase of win rate as you get more white in your deck. So basically, again, white being the strongest color. Although in Cabaretti, it's not as strongly pronounced as in the previous ones. You get like around 53, 52, 51% win rate when you get to like 10 white pips. When you go over that, it's closer to 55, 56, 57. So like 2-3 percentage points gained across the whole gradient of how white intensive is your deck. In terms of red, we see another type of curve shape, basically. So we see a relatively high win rate when you have little red, and a relatively high win rate when you are heavy on red. And that and in the middle, it just doesn't seem to be working. So probably what it means is that either you splash some superpower from red and you basically have a white green with a bit of red splash, but like a splash plus plus, or you have red that is very open and you get like really good red cards in high abundance and you can allow yourself for playing quite a lot of red. Or, and this is the trap of that archetype, it seems, you end up with trying to build a white, green, red deck and you get those middling red cards to fill it in, and then the win rate is not really impressive. I think I'll show that comment. Late Strangles is the red that always puts me in Naya. And I think that this is a good way of looking at it, Isaiah. When you see late cards that are really good, that's probably the moment you should pounce on the 3-color archetype that is, not one of the strong ones. And hopefully next week I can look at it when I will try to look at power of draft signals and how, like what does it mean that you see Strangle as a pack 1, pick 6, for example, and how rare does it happen? How rarely does it happen? And what you can get out of there in terms of knowledge of the draft. But the last color I didn't talk about yet is green, and it seems to me that Cabaretti as a family is defined by green, and I think that the green is the color that really defines it. You can see that very heavy green decks have really impressive, for that archetype, win rates of around 60%. So if green is open, then you can start thinking of getting more into the Cabaretti range, even if white or red is not flowing, because the green can pull it on its own if it's open. Oh, that's a good question, Omnat. If multicolored cards on average are stronger than monocolored cards, and we know that they are more pip intensive, should we see an increase in win rate with more pips across all colors? Yes, we should. And we're going to look at this data in a second, but that's a very good question. It would be rude not to highlight it. Right, so here we have with Cabaretti. Also, like, green light decks can be pretty strong, but that, I guess, is some weird situation when you were basically almost mono red, mono white. Then you picked some green cards and maybe you had some red multicolor cards to splash. So that might be the case, because white red is not a supported archetype. All right, going back to Maestros, the Grexis archetype. Here, I think that one important thing to look at is, generally, I think that from the data that I've seen here, Maestros is a blue-black with some red splashes archetype more than full Maestros, a full 3-color version. So you can see-ish that heavy blue versions of it are quite strong. So, when you go over 14 pips of blue, you have an increase in the win rates in general. Also, black, it increases, especially black increases with power the more black you get in your deck. And actually, generally, those decks are quite heavy on the black already. So you don't see the low splash of black in those decks almost at all. And then in terms of red, you see the strongest performances, except for this, last 19 pip deck, which probably has is super heavy on red because red was super open. But we see that stronger versions of the Maestros decks will have 4 or 5 red pips in them. Probably a couple of removals, couple of the multicolor spells, and the rest is going to be like a blue-black chassis that will be more powerful in terms of how you play this in terms of how you want to build the successful version of this archetype. And then Noob says that makes sense. 2 of the best black cards are BB1. Arguably, 1 of the best black cards is BB1. Okay, 2 of the 5 best. Yes, then I would agree with that statement. Because we're, of course, talking about the Clubber and Murder. But we're going to go to that a bit later. Okay, the last one is Riveteers, and should more of River of Tears. This deck is just not good. And from the data, the picture is absolutely weird. But basically, it appears to me, at least, that basically the problem with Riveteers is that red doesn't fit to it. Because you can see that red is actively hindering the performance of this deck. I mean, if it's a bit more heavy on the red, we see the win rates drop to 51, 49, 49, 50, 52, this kind of level of percentage play. If you have a very little, a larger splash of red, it's around 55-56% win rate, which would be quite well, quite impressive actually, compared to how the archetype performs in general. So I think that the problem with Riveteers is that you should basically draft Golgari and splash maybe red, which is a weird thought, because both in red heavy and in green heavy archetypes, they seem to be doing slightly better. But generally, yes, I think if you really have to draft Riveteers for some reason, I would not even like consider doing that without having like a super good bomb, which there is none in that color pair. And then going sort of trying to make a Golgari deck with some red for splash. And I think that rest of them have been traps. And I still don't know, were they traps because they were so overdrafted in the first days, or were they traps because the color combination is just so poor? And maybe they were going worse than they should because of particular problems with, for example, flyers. And I think that there is some hints in the individual card win rate data that shows that maybe the problem with flyers is something that is pretty important for those decks. All right, well, that covers the tilt and balance of the colors in the 3-color combinations. I almost said 3-color pairs, but no, not yet. I'll probably do it somewhere later. Right, next thing we have is Archetype Openness. And I did it already for several previous sets. And what I defined as openness is how many cards, approximately, because you know I'm estimating it from distributions of where the card goes, with a win rate of over 56%, will you see on an average pod? And it's calculated based on ALSA. So, you know, if we know that we have roughly 2.4 commons per pod on average, and the common always wheels, we're going to see 2.4 of them at each table on average. And then I put 2.4 of that. If there is an uncommon that goes like third, I will see roughly 0.3 of this uncommon per pod on average. So I will add 0.3. And then I sum up all those cards that have a win rate of over 56%. And I calculate the openness measure. So let's say in Selesnya, you're going to see on average 58 cards that have a win rate of 56% or more in each pod. And of course, the win rate, I only look at the win rate within that archetype. I don't look at the win rate as a generic one. Yeah, land distribution is random. I'm still, because it's a painful data set, the draft data set, but I looked at it and basically it seems like everything is treated according to the rarity. There's no special slots. It's all quite even. So I don't know if each pack has at least one land. I don't think so. They are not seeded like that, but you will see an average of 2.4 of each land per pod. That's slightly off topic for this one. Definitely we'll be talking about it next week. And based on us, I can calculate this openness measure. So let's take a look at how does it. Yeah, there we go. So these are from the most open colors to the least open colors in terms of seeing cards that are really good in that particular archetype. And we start with Band. That's not a surprise. Band is A, the strongest archetype, and B, it has 3 colors, which means that you will see more good cards because there's more cards that go into that archetype than into a 2-color one. But in each pod, you will see on average 86.9 good Band cards. That's enough to make 2 decks. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you can pick 87 cards because you only pick 42, but it means that you will have not only see enough to make a deck, but also to have some selection. So this is a humongous number. So basically, you can force Band on average. Obviously, there will be some differences from table to table, and possibly this number will go down as the format progresses because people will figure out that, you know, Band is good and open. And then the other two archetypes that are quite open are Azorius and Selesnya. So basically, even though you don't see anything, the green cards don't matter for Azorius, you still see 78 good cards for that archetype per each pod, because of course win rates for Azorius are slightly different than win rates for Band. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And Selesnya, you will also see something like 68 cards every pod that are good in Selesnya. And then we have a packet of three colors. We have Grexis, so the blue, black, red, Dimir, blue, black, and Obscura, the white, blue, black. So basically the blue, black package. And you see around 45 cards for each of those archetypes, so like 45, 43. Oh, good. So the audio sounds fine. Sorry. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not. It's your. It's not me. It's you. And then we have a big drop off, and there is Rakdos with 23.5 cards, good cards that you see per pod. Now this means you don't see enough of those good cards in Rakdos, and that means that you really have to draft the hard way to get on the Rakdos train and notice that it's open. And we're going to come back to it in a couple of slides. Hi, Dominic. And then we have Naya with, Cabaretti with around 16 cards that you see. That's definitely not enough to build a deck, and that might explain why the win rate of this deck is so low. It's just because you don't see good cards, and you have to keep in mind that this is sort of linked problem. Good decks have more good cards, that's why you see more of them. Bad decks have fewer cards that are have a win rate of over 56%, so that will also limit it. Maybe once people will start aggressively drafting Band, it will open paths for things like Rakdos, because when people will stop drafting certain cards, the win rate of them will go up and they will reach that category. So this measure is sort of both showing you the strength of the color and the over-under draftedness of it at the same time. And it's hard to disentangle which one is the main factor that's causing the more or fewer cards to be visible. And at the bottom of it, we have the Junt and Gruul, and you see roughly 2 or 1.5 good cards for Riveteers and Gruul every pod. Now that is definitely not enough. So that's the problem with the thing. The cards are not powerful, and the deck is not open. You don't get like easy picks for your deck, and then that's why it will underperform. So so basically, comparing the win rate data to the openness data back to back, we see that the band color combinations are both most open and also having the highest win rate. But there is one pretty interesting data point here, and that's the only reason really why I should put this graph in, because otherwise it's hard to read even. And that's the Rakdos, which has a 55.2% win rate, just fourth behind the band combinations, even though there's only 23.5 cards open on average. And that makes me think that if black-red is open, the color is extremely powerful. And people that I trust with their opinion, like Florida Man, what's the old guy's name? LSV, they are swearing that Rakdos is a really good color combination if it's open and if you can draft the aggressive version of it. So I think that there is... he's younger than me. So there is a potential that as the format progresses, and that's why I would like to stress your attention to this one. Oh, NCAA, yeah, that's another one that was swearing by Rakdos. I think that as the format progresses, if people really discover that Band is the place to go, Rakdos is going to be the place to go, because this deck, even if it's relatively not open, doesn't have a bunch of really good cards, can still post a fourth best win rate, even though it's marginal with the rest. But that's something that I would be at least watching over the coming weeks as the format matures. I'm pretty sure that Rakdos can raise the ranks and become one of the top archetypes along those band atrocities that are menacing us. I mean, I'm saying menacing. I'm only playing band. Why would I play something different? Okay. And this is just another visualization of the same thing. So basically, there is a clear trend, although not a perfect trend. The more open the color, as you see on the bottom axis, the higher the win rate, as you see on the x-axis. So yeah, that's about openness of the archetypes. So let's move a bit to the mana base. I mean, I already started my rant with mana bases being underestimated, and well, I wouldn't be myself if I didn't back it up by some numbers. So in this series of analyses, I'm focusing on pips of a color in a deck and potential color sources in a deck. Now, for this particular analysis, as a source, I treated only lands. I don't look at the 3-color family fixer creatures, because it would be complicated to treat them the same as lands, as they basically don't add a mana to the board, but they will change 1 mana that does nothing into something that can add everything. So it would be hard to calculate what do they exactly do. So instead of that, I only looked at, how many sources you have potentially for each color. So if I have like 8 mountains, 8 forests, and a Cabaretti charm, I will count it as having 9 sources of each, basically, because the Cabaretti, not charm, but Cabaretti, whatever land, can be either a mountain or a forest. So I count it as both, sort of. It's also not perfect, because in some situations the choice will be pretty hard. But for the sake of this analysis, I use them. I treat them as a sort of like sources of all 3. So I made this graph on purpose unreadable for you, because I don't want you to read it. I want you to look at it. But basically, on one side of the square, we have how many pips are there in the deck. So how many color pips do your spells in the deck have? And it goes from 23 to 40. And on the other, we see how many sources are there per deck. And it goes from 16 to extreme 30, which must be really extreme. That must be someone playing like, I don't know, 10 maybe dual and triple lands in their deck, even more. And I counted the, win percentage of each spot. So basically, I'm highlighting the square that has 24 pips and 16 sources, or here you have 24 pips and 24 sources. And it seems in general trend is you gain power with number of pips. So the decks with the large number of pips are generally stronger, but they do need to have a support in land. So if you put few sources and many pips, you're gonna get a very low win rate, and that's this quadrant that I'm highlighted, the bottom left quadrant with the blue ones, with the very heavily blue numbers. Blue is low in this particular case. If you have many pips and you have many sources, and that's the bottom right quadrant, then is the golden spot where your winning decks are going to be localized. And that means that you want to have a combination of multicolor spells and a very good fixing, and that's the secret of getting more wins in this format. So basically, neglecting your mana base, even if you draft a good deck, is not going to solve anything, because if you neglect your mana base, you're just not going to be able to cast your spells and you're going to lose because of that. So that's the secret. And if you look at the decks that have few pips and not such a great fixing as well, they are going to be middling, because with fewer pips, you get fewer of those multicolor cards, and the multicolor cards seem to be more powerful because that's what they should be. They will be always a bit higher on rate, because obviously it's harder to cast something that costs blue-black than something that needs only one blue and one colorless. So in theory, the blue-black card should be slightly stronger. So yeah, good mana, good life, as Isaiah said in the chat. Really think hard about getting that fixing, and then you can possibly, you can gamble it and just like go straight to the 3-color cards and start picking good fixing early, and you're going to be advantaged anyway because you picked stronger cards and good mana to support them, and you will win a lot of matchups purely based on the fact that you have more power from the cards because you took the effort to get the good fixing. I think that this is sort of like the cube mentality in that particular case, when mana gives you more assets to your deck than picking a slightly better card for the deck. All right. Just give me a second. Oh, thanks for the subs, by the way, to Isaiah and Mercurio Blue, and for the follows to Giorgio, Nixar, Dr. Numbers. Hey, that sounds familiar. Gold Links, Dalton Syme, Dalton YSME, Daltonisme, Rob Roberville, that was 5 hours ago. I still thank them, but just a quick break so I can refocus my thoughts and watch my snoring cat. Okay, so what I did then was trying to look at yeah, I know, Dr. Numbers, that sounds like something that I would come up with, but no, it's not my alter ego. It's a non-related Dr. Numbers. So after looking at general mana base, I decided to look at the mana base of the 3rd color in particular, because this will be a decision that sometimes you will have to take, which is, do I want to play the 3rd color, or am I content with playing 2 and maybe lowering the power level slightly for the better mana? And first of all, I looked at the number of sources of the 3rd color you have in your deck. So basically, I looked at which color of the 3 colors that are main colors are there, and which one of those 3 colors will have the lowest number of sources as the sort of like extended splash color. And an interesting result is that you basically, on one source, you have quite a high win rate at 56.7%, but then it drops off to 53%, and from then adding sources increases the win rate quite dramatically, especially when you go to 8-9 sources of the 3rd color. You go to the like 60%, 61% win rate area. And I was thinking long and hard about it, and wondering why do we have that extreme spike of win rate at one source. And then I realized that this is probably because it means that this deck maybe splashes one card, and it does so off the back of the 2 family fixers probably, and it counts as a 3-color deck in 17Lands data, but it's actually a 2-color deck with a couple of those family fixers and maybe one bomb to support them, and one land of that particular color as well. So so it's almost a 2-color deck, which is an unfair comparison to the rest that are strictly 3-color decks. And you can see, even at 6 sources of your 3rd color, you're not going to get an impressive win rate. It only starts to be good after 7. And that should make you think about how difficult it is to... Papataka is asking if I looked at treasures. No, I didn't, because if I would add treasures, I would unjustly boost Riveteers, and that would lower Well, one would hope that there are no decks that have 3 colors and 0 sources of the third color. I mean, maybe there were a couple, but there was definitely not a sufficiently large group. I mean, I'm usually trimming anything below 100 games from that kind of analysis. There's always weird exceptions, Isaiah. I haven't seen your Sticky Fingers decks, but Zach Kagan is asking, 17Lands differentiates before 3-color decks and 2-color decks plus splash, right? Right. I looked at 3-color decks. Thank you. I didn't look at the 2 colors and splash. So that's why if someone is splashing successfully out of one source, and I didn't look at the family fixers as sources in that analysis if you came in a bit late, that means it must have other sources and other cards that cause the particular mana, which made me think that it's probably the family fixers. I didn't check it because I didn't have time, but I'm pretty sure. Dan One, the man. I'm not sure I understand. Is this saying that people have 9 sources of their third colors? Yes, they do. That's for extremely well fixed decks. And they do happen sometimes. And then I wanted to look, is there like some kind of like a trend in terms of number of pips per deck? So basically, it can be that the third color being slightly extended splash is better for the general performance, or maybe it's better that the decks are more evenly balanced and the third color will have like, I don't know, 10 pips. And I looked at it and there doesn't seem to be a massive difference. There doesn't seem to be a benefit of having small splash of the third color or big splash of the third color in terms of win rate. There's this weird result. So basically, if I look at 3 pips, we have 53.6 win rate, and it goes around 55% line across the board, basically. So I don't see a big issue with I don't see any like significant difference between whether you splash for 3 pips or for 12 pips. It's more or less even in terms of performance. So there is no like massive trend that it's better to have the third color but only do it for a few cards, and then having basically 2 color decks with a bit of a third, which I think means that the set has been designed, at least in that aspect, successfully. You can play heavily 3-color decks and it doesn't hit your win rate so badly. It doesn't differ, at least from 3-color decks that only have a extended splash of that third color. And here we have the same kind of table as the first one, but only for the third color. So basically looking at the numbers of pips per deck and numbers of sources per deck, and you can quite clearly see that even if you splash 3, 4, 5 pips of a third color, you still want to have 7 sources to have a good win rate. And basically, if your splash is like, if the third color is an extended splash, so like 3, 4, 5 pips, you can get away probably with 6 sources to have a decent 57-56% win rate. But if you want to keep up that kind of win rate with a larger third color size, you really want to go to 7-8 sources for that color. And also you can see that generally you don't want to go below those 2, 3, 4 sources. You don't want to go to 2, 3, 4, 5 sources even. You really want to go across the 6, because you see a significant win rate drop off when you have 2, 3, 4, 5 sources, even when you have only 3 pips of that other color. Yeah. And obviously, I mean, you still need to have quite a lot of sources for your main colors. So I think that I will hammer that message again. You really, really need to prioritize mana fixing in this format if you want to be successful, because it seems to be quite important to get a high win rate. to have this good mana, at least particularly in this format. But we could have seen that the earlier formats before as well, not to this extent, but even in Kamigawa, you could see that you wanted a substantial amount of sources, even for a splash, if you could afford it. Okay, this concludes the mana-based part of the seminar, and we're going to finish off with, it's quite a long finish off, but with looking at each archetype in the format. And I will be looking at commons and uncommons, and I'm going to always look at the MVP of the archetype, so best win rate common, and then next slide is going to be best win rate uncommon. Best 2-drop, because I thought that 2-drops are particularly interesting in this format, and actually looking at both which is the best 2-drop and which 2-drop, and how big is the difference between the best card and the best 2-drop is going to be quite interesting. And then I also selected one card by hand from each archetype in each rarity I'm looking at it, that I thought maybe is interesting, and very often these are the cards that are also underpicked. So yeah, just for your thought. It's more like a food for thought. I'm not going to give you any recipes with those cards. I'm going to maybe speculate about why they might be so good. But I think that the cards I selected should be at least in part, interesting for you to consider in your decks. And as I said, most of them are going to be readily available in draft, so you're going to see them quite a lot, because I tried to pick cards with high ALSA, so average last seen as measure, which means that they are passed quite a lot over the table. So they either wheel frequently or almost wheel in case of the uncommons. So you will see quite a lot of them. Okay, so I start with the 2-color combinations, and I started with Azorius. And guess which common is the best? Inspiring Overseer, the 3-mana, 2/1 flying, draw a card, gain 1 life, possibly cleans the kitchen for you, and maybe even, can write you a poem or something. This card does everything. It has a win rate at 66% at the common in the white-blue archetype. Now, arguably, this is the best archetype for that card, because obviously it also cares about flyers, and that's another benefit. But, I will talk about this card only once, but it will appear on every single thing that has white in it. I think it's the highest win rate common, and it usually is also higher win rate than any uncommon in the set is. So yeah, the card is busted. Just pick it. First pick it over most rares. First pick it probably over all uncommons, I guess. I don't think that there's an uncommon with a higher win rate than any archetype. So yeah, high upside, good card. Best 2-drop in the blue-white is still Raffine's Informant. I mean, I say still because ground creatures should not be that important in that particular archetype. But I think that getting a 3/2 that can block quite favorably and looting a card can be quite powerful, even in the Azorius. So the card has a really, really, really solid win rate of 63.6%. And my pick for a card that I thought was interesting is Make Disappear, the 2-mana counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. And it also has Casualty 1 when you can sacrifice a creature and copy Make Disappear. So basically, early in the game, you can sort of counter a 2/3, maybe 4-drop. And later in the game, you can actually counter something more expensive, and sometimes you will have to sacrifice a creature to make sure that you counter that spell. And in the beginning, the numbers for that card were small, but now they are not. And I looked at the data of that card, and it seems to me that the numbers are large enough to say that this is a generically good card, not a card that is good in some niche kind of situations. I think it's a very good tempo play. There is enough of things to be doing at instant. Oh yeah, Isaiah noticed very astutely that you can also counter 2 spells with it. So basically, maybe if someone plays a spell with Casualty, you can actually counter this spell and the Casualty copy of it. So yeah, that's an interesting interesting option on it. But generally, I think that the numbers are strong on it, and the sample size is large enough to say that I think that it's generally good in any Azorius deck and pretty strong in each of them. So don't sleep on this card. It's still going quite late. If I remember, like off the top of my head, I also have around 7, which means that it will wheel probably like 30-40% of the time. So you will see a lot of them. Just pick 1 or 2, and they should be absolutely fine in your blue-white deck and in some other combinations as well. I'm moving to uncommons, and it's very blue here. The best uncommon in blue-white is the Psychic Pickpocket. That's the 5 mana 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you connive, and then when it connives, you may return a permanent to owner's hand. So basically, like, if you do it right, it can be sort of a 4/3 mana war. The card is also very good, 66% win rate. So yeah, clearly the best uncommon in the format in this archetype. Card is also good in other ones, so it's a very good early pick. If you open it, you should be happy to slam it. One of the few cards that can compete on win rate with the Inspiring Overseer. The best 2-drop at uncommon, and that's going to also appear quite a lot in these data, is Fairy Vandal. That's the reprint from Throne of Eldraine, where it was not so impressive, but in this format, it is very impressive. It's a 2-mana flash flying. So again, the flash part makes it play pretty well with Make Disappear if you are into that kind of thing. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Fairy Vandal, and there is plenty of ways of drawing a second card on your turn, at least, and there's a couple of ways of drawing 2 cards on the opponent's turn as well. So every connive creature that you play will also grow Fairy Vandal independently of what you discard, because you are going to draw the connive card. So yeah, it's pretty impressive. And again, lots of nice things have been said about it by other content creators. So don't sleep on that card. And I don't think people do sleep on it, but it's worth knowing that it's probably better than anyone thinks. And my pick that I selected is Slip Out the Back. It's a 1-mana instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It phases out. And I think I was quite surprised to see this card at 62.8% win rate. This has a slightly smaller sample size. It's worth knowing, but it's very available in the draft. I think it works fantastically with things like Fish, because maybe, at some stage when you play this kind of evasive game, Fish will present a dangerous clock. And if you can back up the Fish with the Slip Out the Back, they try to kill it, and instead of that, you put a +1/+1 counter, phase out the Fish, and remember, tokens can be phased out, and they do return to game as nothing happened, but it will come back with the +1/+1 counter. Plus, there are some couple of counter synergies as well. So the card just seems like generally an interesting combat trick for an evasive deck. You have to keep in mind, if you're evasive, you don't care that much about blocking and being blocked, because your creatures will go through. So you're mainly thinking about removal, and this protects from removal, which is great, especially in a set that doesn't have that much reach. It's interesting to play that card, and that's why I selected it as a sort of interesting. And numbers look pretty impressive on it, even though it's in a powerful archetype that's still way above the archetype rate. Also, a 1-mana combat trick always is an interesting one, especially when it can leave something behind. And yeah, when you think about it, this is basically like what's the green thing that gives hexproof and +1/+1 counter? I forgot. Well, I mean, anyone who plays Constructed knows what it's called. I have my brain is running at the last drops of fuel. Snakeskin Veil, thank you, Wanton. So that's basically the blue version of Snakeskin Veil in a colored combination that really, really likes to be evasive. So it doesn't really matter to you that the creature phases out, because what you wanted to do is to get it out of the path of some kind of removal spell. Right, we move to the next archetype, and that's blue-black. Best common by a mile is Girder Goons. That's going to be also the case with most of the black archetypes, which makes me think Girder Goons is by far the best black card in the format. Girder Goons 5 mana, 4/4. When dice create a tapped 2/2 black rogue creature token, and his blitz for 4 mana. So basically, you can play it as a hasty 4/4 that dies into a 2/2 black rogue. So yeah, that has a win rate of 62%, which is really, really, really strong for the Dimir win rate, which is around 54. I would just, coming back to the previous slide, Scanter said the advantage slip has over cards like Veil is that you can use it to remove blockers. Now that's a very good point that should be remembered, that you can actually, you have 3 flyers, they have this one annoying big flyer that stops you from attacking. You just can remove it for a turn, kill them, and then doesn't matter that the creature got a counter. The best 2-drop in the blue-black archetype is Corrupt Court Official, and it was very close with the Snooping Newsy. Keep in mind, Snooping Newsy is still good. It's just that Corrupt Court Official had maybe like 2 percentage points higher win rate. And yeah, it has a win rate of 59.2, so like markedly lower than the Girder Goons, but pretty good itself. So that's nothing to cry about. I think Corrupt Court Official, especially with the card I selected, is a pretty good thing to have. The discard in this format, especially with all the conniving decks, can be quite annoying because you're running out of fuel for doing the connive in a way that will let you gain too much advantage out of it. Because if you discard a land, you might have to, like you'll be in a pickle when a couple of those hit the board, because you will run out of steam and you will just lose the attrition game. And my pick is a card that has just a 0.1 percentage point lower win rate than the Corrupt Court Official, and it's Fake Your Own Death. Mainly picked it because I was high on this card before the release of the set, but as much as I was high on it in Riveteers, and Riveteers turned out to be an absolute flop, it seems to be really strong in Dimir. So Fake Your Own Death gives you +2/+0 to a creature, and the creature gains also whenever it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and you get a treasure token, something I forgot to do 4 times in the last FNM. That's like, Arena makes us lazy. I missed the treasure part altogether in so many games. And I think in one of them, it might have changed the result ever so slightly. But I think the card is pretty good. There is lots of death triggers in this format. You want to play the Goons already, and this on turn 6 with Goons is just a blowout. You want to use the Corrupt Court Official as a sort of like turning it to a 3/1, trading with a real creature and getting it back and still getting another card out of their hand. That's a great trade. So there's like plenty of things that you can do with the card. So and it's still going quite late, so you can get quite a large number of them. And people also say that it basically also works in Esper with the Overseer. Scanter, I think that everything works with Overseer. Just cards and Overseer is a good combo. But SBS mentioned in the chat, it also loops with Carmela. It has plenty of things. Yeah, very well with the Refined Silencer, the thing that dies and then gives something -X for power. That's also making it fantastic. So yeah, I mean, the card has many uses, and in blue-black, it seems to be doing quite a good job in terms of the numbers it posts. If we look at the uncommons in the mirror, Nightclubber, MVP at 62.1, so just higher win rate than the Girder Goons. I mean, the card is just clearly good. It will host completely some of the decks, for example, well, Cabaretti might have a problem with beating a Nightclubber if you like play it and kill I don't know, 4 citizens. Also, with the Fake Your Own Death, you can, for 5 mana, give all the opponent's creatures -2/-2 until end of turn, which can actually kill a lot of things. Played post-combat, it can also do some awful things to your opponent if they block wrong and don't play around it. So just its presence in the metagame is going to change how you play out the games by quite a lot. So yeah, great card. And it's like top black uncommon, I think, in general, and top black uncommon most, I think, of the archetypes. Best uncommon 2-drops in Dimir, Fairy Vandal. We already talked about it. So here you get some connive, but you also get some blitz draws, which will trigger Fairy Vandal. So yeah. And the card I selected was Hypnotic Grifter. I think that the card is pretty good, especially if you're going to enter the realm of those longer games. And the numbers confirm that it's a pretty decent one. It has 59.6 win rate. It's a 1 mana 1/2, and for 3 mana you can connive. So it connives basically. So you can draw a card, discard. If you discard a spell, it becomes bigger. I think it's quite easy in the late game to make it into a 3/4, and then it becomes a problem for your opponent because 4 toughness is quite annoying. If you're playing blue-black and you have some of those 5 different casting costs in your graveyard synergies, you can discard something, very targeted with a particular mana cost, so that you can at instant speed all of a sudden activate your synergies, which can be a sort of combat trick even, or something that will break the board stall. I think it's a general card that does quite a lot. And like late in the game, it will just burn through your lands and you will just draw gas for the rest of the game, while sometimes even growing it if you draw something that you absolutely don't need anymore. So yeah, I think pretty powerful, strong card. Also, not to mention, the 1/2 body can be actually annoying in the early game, can block some annoying things, and then you just chuck it away. A 1-drop, get a 1 mana card in your graveyard, and then you should be quite happy with that, even at that kind of value. Okay, Rakdos. As I told you, the archetype that will, in my opinion, if people start drafting slightly differently and will jump on the, can I say bandwagon? Can I do the joke? If the people jump on the bandwagon and leave the black-red a bit more open, Torpid Ninja is asking, wait, are these the win rates specific to decks in this color combination? Yes, it's the win rates specific to decks in this color combination. Yeah. Okay, back to the things. So these are the win rates specific for Rakdos in this particular case. Again, top common, Girder Goons. Not surprising. It has sacrifice synergies, draws you cards, leaves the body, blah, 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 blah. It's a really good card. Don't sleep on it. It's really strong. It's the, like a very good impression of the Diagraph Horde. Best 2-drop is the Body Dropper, the Signpost Uncommon, and that always makes me quite warm in the stomach when they make those kind of 2-color common creatures in for the archetype, and they are the best 2-drop. It means that clearly they're doing something right in there. So good job, Body Dropper. I think the card can be quite menacing. If you get a right draw, it can dominate the board very well. And I think yeah, I think that this is like the pivotal card for this archetype to be good. I think that you need at least 2 or 3 of those to make your Rakdos deck really strong. And from what I heard, the decks that do have 2 or 3 of them are really powerful. So IZS says, yeah, the fact that it gets the counter from any creature sack is huge. Yeah, that's true. And I think the best thing about this is that it's the Body Dropper is basically a payoff for all the sacrificing you do, but it also is an enabler because you can use the its own ability to sack something. So you can you are much more in control. Also, the ability that you can sack something is pretty annoying with some spells that you might have in your deck. Like definitely definitely a strong card. For my pick, I selected Paragon of Modernity, and this card I will read because not everyone probably plays with it. This is a 4 colorless artifact creature angel warrior with flying. It's a 2/2 for 3 mana and gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If exactly 3 colors of mana were spent to activate this ability, put a +1/+1 counter on it instead. And it has a win rate of 58.8, so actually higher than the body dropper, slightly lower than Girder Goons. Now, I'll be very honest with you. The numbers are really small for that. But I was really thinking hard, why would that be? And I just think that, this deck might have a problem with flyers. And I'm not saying that this is the solution to that problem, but I think it might be at least helping with that problem. And it is at least worth considering giving the numbers, even though you have this very small sample size. So this is my pick, merely to draw your attention to the possibility that the 4 mana colorless flyer is good in the deck that will have to use the removal on flyers otherwise. I think that, if you're playing against some kind of a tempo deck, just playing this and chumping their 3/1 is fine. Small Sam says you could play Wrecking Crew for flyers. I do agree, but weirdly, Wrecking Crew has terrible numbers, and it might be due to some kind of variance or whatnot. But I don't know. It just Paragon seems to have decent numbers, and I thought it would be rude not to ignore it, but it would be stupid not to mention the fact that it's based on small sample size and therefore possibly noise in the data. Although I did see it pop out in some other decks that also were not like super keen on dealing with flyers. But I think that the problem is in this format is that flyers you probably should block out and kill them. And I agree, Wrecking Crew might do all right, because you might need to keep your removal for the bloody fish, because if fish you only can deal with removal, and that might be one of the strengths of the decks that contain blue. Yeah, that's true. That Paragon might also close the game because you can make it like into a 7/7 at some stage. All right, let's move to the uncommons. We have Nightclubber as the MVP in this archetype as well. 61.5% win rate. That's again the thing that gives -1/-1 with the blitz. Nothing more to say. Still good in a sacrifice deck. Why not? Now the best 2 drops at uncommon is the Riveteers Requisitioner, and that card will appear a couple of times as the best 2 drop. So in uncommon slot. So worth thinking that out of all the uncommons in red color combinations, Riveteers Requisitioner seems to be the card you want to be playing. It has a win rate of 58.2. This is a 2 mana 3/1 with Blitz 3, and when it dies, you create a treasure token. So that's the card. You basically can play 3 mana, you make a treasure token, draw a card, and deal 3 damage. My pick for a card, and I mean, I don't think that grinders and experienced players like the usual guests of my stream will be surprised by that, but Involuntary Employment, the steal spell for this format, is pretty good. It's a 4 mana sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap the creature, it gains haste until end of turn, create a treasure. The creating of the treasure makes it so much easier to have enough mana for the sack part. So very worth playing it. And it goes quite late. So if you're playing black-red and black-red is open, as it should be when you're playing that color combination, you should be able to get access to it if they're open in your pod. Yeah. Grizzly Sigil is also one of the cards that impressed me. I never managed to squeeze them onto the slide, but it was impressive in multiple archetypes, and at the same time, I think it was the removal with the highest alsa. So you see quite a lot of it because people are not super keen on drafting it. Yeah. Okay, red green. We have to cover it, so whatever. But just look at the numbers under those cards. Best common, Jewel Thief, 57.4%, which is respectable, but that's the best that it has to offer. Best 2-drop, Mayhem Patrol. The Jewel Thief, by the way, is the 3-mana 3/3 Vigilance Trample and create a treasure token. So it packs a lot and only has a 57% win rate. Mayhem Patrol, that's 2-mana Menace 1/2 with Blitz. Whenever it attacks, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Ooh. It doesn't say you control. You can target some other creature. I didn't realize that. But this one has only 54.2% win rate. My pick, and that is Noble Scorpion. Yes, I'm going to put this stuff on YouTube. I'm under the same nickname as here. So yeah, I am short. So basically, I put the Rakish Revelers. That's the Naya card, but you can put it in your Gruul decks easily. It has a respectable for that archetype 54.7 win rate. That's the 5/3. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a citizen, and it can be put on the land to fix for colors until you cast it, basically. Yeah, I probably should that idea. I thought I put my link tree. Not now while I'm striving for the rest of my brain activity. Then, looking at the uncommons for this format, the best one is Cleanup Crew, the 6-mana 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or gain exile card from a graveyard, or gain 4 life. Napstar, yes, splashes are included here, but obviously the Rakish Revelers is a bit of a weird splash. And it's only splashes up to 1 card or up to 2 cards that are included in those data. So there were a couple of cards that were splashed in. I ignored most of them, but red-green was so bad that I just put them in, because I think that one thing about this archetype is maybe people are trying to play it a bit too of a super aggro. And maybe what red-green wants to do is it wants to generate treasures early in the game and then just drop chunky creatures. And maybe that's the way to play it with, rather than focusing on the Jetmir's, whatever, the signpost 2-drop. Because Cleanup Crew was the MVP at uncommon level. There were a couple of other larger creatures that had a decent for the archetype win rate. Maybe we should just think of red-green as ramp into chunk rather than anything else. I think that the problem is that there's not enough chunky creatures. Yeah. Best 2-drop at uncommon level was the Venom Connoisseur, thing that can give Death Touch. I mean, it's a card that I'm probably most likely to play too much of, because I do like to give everything that I have Death Touch and instant speed by playing the fish card and turning a simple combat into an absolute nightmare for the opponent. But that's just my personal preferences. And my pick for the card that was interesting in terms of win rate was the Unlucky Witness, the 1-drop. Whenever it dies, exile 2 top cards of your library. Until next end step, you may play one of those cards. So basically, it's a 1/1 that dies into drawing a card. Right. Just don't play Gruul. Yeah, that's, I think, that the easiest solution to the to the conundrum of whether what to do with it. I would say let's wait a bit. Let's wait a bit for better builds, or maybe getting slightly more open, and then maybe Gruul will be more playable. But for now, it looks like it's a pretty bad archetype. And the last 2-color pair, unlike the 3-color pairs that we were talking before, last 2-color combination is white-green. Best common, Inspiring Overseer. That's a shocking surprise. 63.7% win rate, which is mental. Best 2-drop, Civil Servant. Again, the Signpost common 2-drop is the best 2-drop for the color combination, which is a good sign. 60.7% win rate, which is quite impressive. I think that, you know, there is many ways of attacking with it as a 3/3 lifelinker on turn 3, which is a great tempo swing. There are several ways of making it even bigger at that stage. It gets a bit outpaced as the game continues, but also white green I think has enough. Oh, sorry. Witness wasn't bugged, no? And I mean, it should play the card until your next. Oh, was it bugged? Okay, it let you play for extra turn. I know that there were plenty of bugs with those cards. I don't get it. But anyway, the Civil Servant might get slightly outsized in the later game, but still, a 3 mana, 2 mana, 2/3 is good. 3 mana, 2 mana, 3/3 lifelinker is really good. So the card and the card posts good numbers, and I'm pretty sure it's dope on the play, and opening hand win rate is probably even higher. For the card that I picked for my card selection, I picked For the Family, the 1 mana instant. It target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, but if you control 4 or more creatures, that creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn instead. And I think that in white green you can easily get to 4 creatures, and this will become like a powerful trick that can completely flip the combat. You can play it with something that will get double strike for some super blowouts. You can play it with as a 4 to the face for 1, which is still a good rate. And it has good numbers at 59.9% win rate. So worth looking at. And you can pick any number of those. You probably want one for your deck, and you will always be able to get it. But I think that numbers suggest it's worth to do that. Now, at the uncommon level, the best card is a Citizen Crowbar, which is an equipment, but it's technically a creature. It's an equipment that gives +1/+1 to the equipped creature, and that allows to sacrifice itself to destroy target artifact or enchantment. But when it enters the battlefield, it generates a citizen and equips the crowbar with it. So basically, it's a 2 mana 2/2 that dies into this equipment and will, be able to kill some enchantment or artifact as well. So this is all at the same time at best 2-drop and the best card at all. So instead of best 2-drop, I showed the second best 2-drop at uncommon level for this archetype, and that's Illuminator Virtuoso. 1/1 double strike. Whenever it becomes the target of a spell you control, it connives. So if you have multiples of those, you can play some kind of a trick deck that will, connive a lot. And that has a 59.9% win rate. So basically the same as For the Family, which should make you think that commons are pretty strong in this format. And my pick for a card that might be interesting is Take to the Streets. That's the sorcery for 5 mana that the creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. And citizens, instead of getting +2/+2, get +3/+3 and vigilance until end of turn. And I picked this card because it has decent numbers, 58.4% win rate, and is also picked quite late. So if you're in white green and you want to go wide, probably that's the card that you should be able to get quite late in the format, in the draft. Okay, so we are done with the 2-color combinations. Now let's go to the 3-color combinations, and some of them look almost identical. We start with Obscura, the white, blue, black, also known as Esper. Best common, Inspiring Overseer, boring. Best 2-drop, again, it's Raffine's Informant. Raffine's Informant. That was something. That's probably 59 point something. Yeah, no, it's not 5. I must have skipped the writing in the number, but it was 50 something. Well, it's boring because it's the best common in everything that has white in it. I mean, what's to talk about it for the 5th time? So yeah, Raffine's Informant is really still good. And then my pick was Run Out of Town, but something went wrong in the presentation, and it says 5% win rate, which is not true. Let's settle on 59. I don't want to Googling it right now, but that must have been somewhere around that area, 58.5, 59. 58.3, thank you, Mud Moses. I think that this card is pretty solid, especially that at least part of the Obscura wants to operate at instant speed. It deals very well with blitz creatures and punishes the opponent for trying to do that by bouncing them, and then you can get ready for them blitzing and things like that. So yeah, interesting pick, and has good numbers as a removal, especially, it probably is like somewhere really close to murder, which probably no one would say before the set was released. So it turns out that Revenge of the Drowned is good even without having a Decayed Zombie. Oh, it's better than Murder, Small Sam says. Yeah, I thought it was close and about. So yeah, that ends the common part of the Obscura. In terms of, oh yeah, I did pick Grizzly Sigil actually in one of the cards. Yeah, I knew that this card was having really good numbers all across the board, and I think it's still very undervalued by the community. But in Obscura, the best uncommon is the Psychic Pickpocket again, the Mana War variant with Connive. Best 2-drop, Fairy Vandal, no surprises there. Again, it just points to you that this card is so good in so many archetypes. And card I picked is Grizzly Sigil, the 1 mana casualty 1 spell. Whenever target creature or planeswalker gets 1 damage and you gain 1 life, but if that creature or planeswalker received damage this turn already, you do 3 damage and gain 3 life to that. And then it has casualty 1, so you can basically play it for 1 mana, sacrifice 1/1, and it will deal 1. You gain 1 life to something, and then it can deal 3 more to that same thing, and you gain 3 life. And I'm pretty sure that there are some combinations when you do a slightly dodgy attack to push some damage through. They block 2 of your creatures, and you can kill both of them with the Grizzly Sigil after attacks or something like that. So there is plenty of potential, and you will gain 6 life, which is a great deal for something that costs 1 mana. Okay. Now let's move to Grexis. I told you already before that Grexis is sort of Demir with the red splash, and I think that the data reflects that. The best performing common in Grexis is Make Disappear, the 2 mana counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. Now this was a really big surprise for me when I saw that data. And this really points me to the fact that this card is really strong. The numbers also, it was not a very small sample size. It was smaller than Snooping Newsy, for example, but maybe by half or so. It was not like 10% of it. So it had a large enough sample size to treat it with respect. Best 2-drop, Snooping Newsy, the blue-black 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, it mills 2 cards, which is probably even more important in Grixis, because that means you can curve Snooping Newsy into. Let's wait for the next slide to learn into what we can curve it out. Also, as long as there are 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard, it gets +1/+1 and it has lifelink, something that has become relevant both to me when I played it, and I see it on the other side of the battlefield quite a lot. My pick, because I was quite surprised that this card was high like it was in the win rate stats, is Crooked Custodian, the 2 mana black 3/2 enters the battlefield tapped. It has decent numbers, nothing to faint about, but 57.1% is quite a lot. And yeah, I think that we should at least consider that this card is absolutely not bad in Grixis decks as a sort of like a early roadblock, or even, you know, playing it at turn 4 and leaving 2 mana for some kind of instant interaction. At uncommon level, Corpse Appraiser, that's the MVP at 63.7. Now, this is probably the best uncommon in the set in terms of power level. The only thing holding it slightly back is the color requirements, but it has phenomenal numbers, and it was also quite good as a splash in black-red and blue-black, if I remember correctly. So 63.7 in an archetype that has 54% win rate is an insane value. So yeah, if you can get Corpse Appraisers, you're good. And of course, Snooping Nusi allows you to curve into it easily, because the self-mill will usually get some kind of a creature you can exile from the graveyard and then get the Organ Hoarder treatment. So that's the MVP. The best 2-drop, it's again Riveteers Requisitioner, the 2-mana 3/1 that dies into a treasure and has Blitz. My pick was a little chat. The 2-mana Casualty 1 spell. You look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library, and it has Casualty of 1. So yeah, the card has good numbers, 57.8%. Also, the blue-black draw 2, discard a card had a pretty good numbers. So yeah, I think that generally instant card draw is pretty powerful in this particular archetype, because it lets you having a plan B when you are holding up your best common in Make Disappear or some removal or whatever. If you have lots of instant interaction and some synergies between spells and your Maestro's signpost uncommons, you want to play a little chat, at least one copy of it in your decks. Right, Riveteers. I'm pretty tired, so let's just say don't play it. But best common is Jewel Thief, as unsurprisingly the card is busted on rate. Best 2-drop is Crooked Custodian. By the way, Jewel Thief, 57% win rate. Best 2-drop, Crooked Custodian, 52.6% win rate. Ugh. My pick for a card that does least worse is Prize Fight, because Prize Fight is roughly at the same level as Murder is in this archetype, which surprised me, but it's still 53.5% win rate, which is pathetic. Prize Fight obviously is the fight spell that generates a treasure as well. Best uncommon, Nightclubber. Yeah, we know it. Best 2-drop, Riveteers Requisitioner. Surprise. And my pick, and that's maybe a card I can talk 15 seconds longer than the rest of that pathetic archetype that we probably need to work harder on figuring out. Dusk Mangler, the 7-mana 5/4, and as an additional cost to cost it, sacrifice a creature, discard a card, and pay 4 life. And when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature, discards a card, and loses 4 life. So basically, you choose one, they have to do all the 3. And this card has really good numbers in every archetype. It's not like in top 5, but it's around there. I mean, in some archetypes, it will be actually top 5 uncommons. In some of them, it will be just oscillating around that level. And I was quite surprised by that. So I decided that since Riveteers doesn't have too much to be cheerful about, maybe at least I can highlight that Dusk Mangler is looking like at least a decent, if not even a good card. So Cabaretti, the Naya, red, green, white, best common, surprise, Inspiring Overseer. Yes, this color combination has white in it, therefore the best common is Inspiring Overseer. Thank you very much. Pathetic 59.9% win rate. Best 2-drop. Oh, it's a white color combination, and we're talking about 2-drops. It's Raffine Informant. I think that it's still interesting that Raffine's Informant is doing better than the Civil Servant in this combination. Worth noting as well. Not by much, if I remember correctly, but by some. And has a win rate of around 57%. My pick, the card I wanted to highlight, was Warm Welcome. I know that some people say that the card is not so great, but at least in Cabaretti, it does have good numbers, and that's probably because the good Cabaretti decks want to have creatures and tricks. So it does much better in this particular color combination than in anything else, because I think the Cabaretti want to have a lot of creatures. And tricks, and if you have tricks, the 1/1 becomes slightly better than in the deck without tricks, when it just becomes a, well, speed bump. So yeah, if you think you might end up in Naya colors, Warm Welcome is your friend. In terms of uncommons, best uncommon in total is Luxurious Libation, the 1/X spell that gives target creature +X/+X, and you create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. It has 58.6% win rate, which is solid. It's a good trick, a good finisher, and it also helps your, I think, your ultimate goal of generating a wide board. Best 2-drop is the Citizen's Crowbar. We talked about it before. Another thing that generates citizens, and also later can become an equipment that you can chuck around. And my pick is the Mage's Attendant. This card also appears in most color combinations as something really solid. It's the 3-mana 3/2 that generates also a 1/1 blue wizard creature token that can be sacrificed to counter a non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. And I picked it mainly because it was only 0.1 percentage points lower in terms of win rate than Luxurious Libation, and I think that it also showcases that theme of, yes, you really want to go white in Cabaretti, and that's what you should be focusing on that. So Griffin asking, so the best red-green decks don't have red. I mean, this is a red-green-white combination, and yes, best red-green-white combinations don't have red almost at all. You want to maybe have 3-4 red cards, like that includes the 3-color cards. So yeah, you want to be playing basically white, green, and splashing red for some powerful cards. And we have arrived at the end of our 3-color combinations, if I'm not mistaken. We go to best one, Brokers, aka Bunt, aka green, white, blue. Guess what is the best common in that color combination? Yes, it is Inspiring Overseer. I know that I'm maybe have given a couple of spoilers there, but it is indeed the best common in a white containing color combination yet again. Best 2-drop, you might be shocked to find, but Raffine's Informant is the best 2-drop in this combination as well. So another surprise. Overseer has a 64.7% win rate, Raffine's Informant 62.5%. You know, keep in mind this is the best color combination in 3 colors. That's gonna be by far higher win rates than any other 3-color combinations. The card I selected was Quick Draw Dagger because Detsy hyped it. And whenever Detsy hypes a card, I'm very suspicious whether that card is good or just hyped. Like in terms of the Goldvein pick in Kaldheim, that card was actually not really good, except for maybe a very small subset of decks. But in case of Quick Draw Dagger, at least in the Broker archetype, it seems to be doing pretty well. So at least this is something to strongly consider when you're playing it. This is a 3-mana equipment with flash. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature. That creature gains first strike until end of turn. And later is just a short sword, so you can just move it around for 1 mana, and it gives +1/+1. Has a very respectable 60.4% win rate, so you should consider playing it in your decks. And in terms of uncommons, The best uncommon in Brokers is Mage's Attendant, which was really surprising for me. But the card seemed good in all the other archetypes. As you saw in the previous slide, it only lost out by 0.1 percentage points to be the best card in Cavaretti. And here it has 64.5. So, we're talking about just slightly worse than the Inspiring Overseer. So quite impressive. 2-drop at uncommon here. Again, Citizen's Crowbar. So this card popped out quite a lot as the best 2-drop. And the numbers are really high. That's 61.9% win rate. And my pick for showcasing a card is Out of the Way. That's the 4-mana instant. It costs 2 less if it targets a green permanent, just to make your Riveteers opponent even more miserable. And it basically bounces a permanent to its owner hand, and you draw a card. So pretty powerful if you cast it for 2. Really, really still very solid when you cast it for 4. I mean, when you think about it, into the Royal cost 4 mana, we were super happy to play it. Obviously, it had the flexibility of being able to cast it if you wanted for 2, but now you can luckily play it for 2 with the full benefit of drawing a card. So swings and roundabouts here. But it has a 62.8% win rate, and the card is going slightly late. I think that people look at it that it's a color specific card and maybe don't pick it because they think, I mean, it's a downside that you have to pay for. Well, I think that this card is like purely on the upside and has good numbers across the board as well. All right, whew. We managed to go through all the color combinations, all the cards, all the mana requirements of the decks in Streets of New Capenna. This is the first look at the data. I'm going to probably dive a bit deeper on following weeks, maybe looking at sub-builds of archetypes, looking at draft portion and reading signals portions. Hopefully I'll try to do that next week. So we're in for a longer ride with this format, but it looks very interesting. Hopefully it will stay interesting and don't become like this competition of who gets on the better band deck, but maybe next week we can dedicate to look at the villain and try to beat it and find ways of dealing with band decks. But with that, I would, as always, like to extend my gratitude to the 17Lands team. They are always helping me. They provided me with the early data access. They're, as always, working tirelessly to make 17Lands the best tool you get for analyzing or tracking your limited data. And you know what? They are succeeding at it every single week, so pretty good for them. So kudos to Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wu, and if you can follow them on Twitter, use 17Lands, support 17Lands Patreon, that would be great. And of course, a big thank you to Fake Jake Brown, who is my secret helper in terms of putting it out as a podcast. And with that, I think I'm going to just collapse and crawl into bed, not before sending you somewhere for a raid. But yeah, thanks for being here. Also, for the ones of you that listen to it in the podcast version, I would like to thank SSQ and Mana Junkie for the music that we're using for the intro outro.